Good morning. This is Axel Merk, President and Chief Investment Officer of Merk Investments, with a morning briefing here, as I've been doing since about a week or so. This is going to be short, comparatively short. I want to give you an update on a few things. One is this morning, it's been reported that the repo pickup was none. There were no bids, so to speak. I had tweeted yesterday that the funding stress in some ways had gotten into reverse. Towards the end of a month, there is always the fear that a lot of capital is needed, that the need for funding is huge. And so you have market makers get positioned for that, and apparently they were over positioned for it. Now you would have thought that maybe that's going to weaken the dollar. That has not been the case. That didn't take place. But it did create some volatility. Some currencies, notably the Norwegian kroner, for example, had 1% jumps in seconds. And so whether that's related to that or not is difficult to tell. But clearly not everything is good in these markets at this stage. A relevant part here may be that the funding stress is set to come under control for the time being, at least for this wave. Somewhat related to that, former New York Fed President Dudley was on Bloomberg this morning, and the discussion was about stress in emerging markets and also whether the Fed or others should support the junk sector, the high yield sector. And I mentioned them in the same sentence, only in the sense that they're both historically vulnerable. So if you have a flight of capital out of emerging markets, that can cause enormous stress, and then who knows whether and to what extent that may happen. Several of the currencies of the emerging markets have been hit extremely hard. Some are down 20% for the year. Those are big moves. The point he's making is that the junk market, at least, that people choose those corporate structures. Not everybody, or most people, are not in the junk status by bad management, so to speak, but because they choose to have a highly levered balance sheet. And so the question is, should you bail them out? And the counter question to that is, well, yeah, they might deserve to fail, but what about if, quote unquote, all or most of them fail? And so that does create a different set of issues that can cause ripple effects if and by the way, in the financial crisis, the support was always for, and that's the whole point of central bank in some ways, you provide liquidity against sound collateral. And so the question is whether some of these Rubicons will be crossed as part of that. And let me move here a little bit further into the bailout scenario. Yesterday, maybe it was before that as well, but I noticed that yesterday there was some outrage about a special bailout for the jets. Now, for the jet industry, the folks who use private jets. And there is going to be outrage when you have a bailout where you're spending billions, or in this case trillions. The little man is going to suffer, and there'll always be people who will suffer, and yet you keep others afloat. And just a point here specifically on the private jet industry. Obviously, it's always in the eyes of the beholder whether you deserve a bailout or not. The argument of the industry, the lobbyists were very busily at work, said, hey, tens of millions of jobs actually depend on general aviation and so forth. The point I can only make is that as the eye of the beholder, I have a small single engine plane, and so I don't have a jet, but I do get to visit various small airports, and at which some bigger, some smaller, and I do tend to visit some of these jet centers as well. Well, during the Santa Rosa fire, for example, the employees at that local airport in Santa Rosa would show up for work while their homes were burning at home. Those are not folks who make millions. Those are they may not get minimum wage, but they do not get a lot of money for being compensated, certainly not for the risk that they're taking. And so you can argue, and then, for example, many mechanics have struggled to survive in the general aviation industry because the regulatory overhead, the The red tape is enormous, liability is very high, and they're not making millions working on many of these small planes. Now, obviously, there are very wealthy, rich people there, and should they get a bailout? That's a very fair question. I'm not suggesting that they necessarily should, but I think that people should ask the broader questions. Well, who should get a bailout, and notably, who is supposed to decide? Um, the and You can chew on that. Um, the longer term issue on any of this is really what is going to be the long term fallout. The After the financial crisis, we had quote unquote bailouts. Were they warranted to save the financial system? There was a lot of misrepresentation about what happened and so forth, but plenty of anger, plenty of wrongdoing. But 10 years on, we had rather socialist tendencies because, hey, if capitalism only works when things go well and otherwise the rich get bailed out and the poor are losing out, why not embrace socialism? And so the question really is, how are we going to get out of the current phase? Now it's all hands on deck, but the chips will fall somewhere. And very clearly, the, the folks who don't have a safety net, the folks at the bottom of the economic ladder are almost certainly going to suffer tremendously more. Now, there are some handouts, but as nice as a $1,500 check, or maybe it's going to be more, maybe it's going to be less, it's going to be, that's not going to take you all that far when you have bills to be that need to be paid. And so these are very, very difficult questions. I'm not suggesting there's any right or wrong way to go about these things, but I'm just saying that when one designs these things, and it's very difficult to do this in the short term, there is going to be a fallout. And as has been reported, a lot of pet projects have made it into the stimulus bill, and then that's why you get the unanimous the vote there in the Senate. That's the only way you can push these things through is you dole out something to everybody, and that's just the nature of the politics. And so it's going to be years before we know how this is going to play out. Let me make here one other broader point here, and I know I'm just talking about the ticks here in the markets, but if you look at what's been happening on the political front, we have now a more somber outlook of how this is going to play out. I'm based in California. Our shelter in place has just been extended for the full month of May, for the full month of April. And while for someone like myself, I'm falling into a routine here, for a lot of people, this is of course bad news because they are not going to have a job, they're not going to have an income, and that really then goes to the ripple effects. Well, did we reach a loaner market the other day or not? And the question is, can we buffer the shock so that the economy can get back up and running? And then, as many people have pointed out, the longer this goes on, the more difficult it's going to be. I just see no way we can go back to quote unquote normal when this ends. Governor Cuomo of New York said, well, when we have these rapid testing done that you can do in your home, then we can go back to normal. Well, apparently there is a fast test now, but ramp up production, get into every household, devise a system to get this all done. These things are not happening overnight. And then at the other end of the spectrum, I just mentioned kind of the hardship on many groups. There is a tremendous amount of resources out there, and to help people, the care package, that's a care, I believe is what the bill is called, is able to reach many small businesses. It does seem to be reasonably unbureaucratic to apply for aid there. And then there are lots of other aid programs. One of the things, and by all means, I'm not giving tax advice here, and while I do this, let me just, I do have to show some disclosure, so let me show this here in between. In the state of California, for example, and I presume other states as well, if you have a disaster strike you and you have a loss from that, you can go and claim back some of the taxes you paid the previous year, assuming the previous year was profitable. In some other countries, by the way, that is not an emergency mode. That is standard, that you can kind of have a clawback position in profits from previous years. And so there is something of that sort. And then lots of private companies are offering aid. Facebook and Google, and again, no investment advice here on these companies, were in the news yesterday. Hundreds of millions they're making available to in a variety of different programs. Some specifically targeted at the medical field, but some at entrepreneurs, small businesses, and whatnot. And so lots and lots of resources are available, and so that will of course buffer things. The question is it going to be enough? And ultimately, we are in a credit-driven society, and the cash has stopped to flow in many areas of that. And so that means we're going to go into reverse, into shutdown mode on many of these things, and will cause a lot of damage. There will undoubtedly be many failures. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is when you have a failure in a physical enterprise, let's say fracking or hotel, um, maybe in the new economy that's going to emerge, different needs will be there, but the production facilities are still going to be around. And so the creditor can take over the facility and then run it. Now, that doesn't sound like a V-shaped recovery, and it certainly is not. But the capital that had been put into building some of that infrastructure is not necessarily lost. So that's something to keep in mind. And then of course, um, at some point, chips will fall into place on how we'll get out of this. And just here to give some more 2 cents on that, I don't think this will be a coordinated effort. I've mentioned this before, especially not on a global scale, but even on a national scale. There will be a patchwork probably of ways to go about it. Right now, we still have a crude approach by shutting the state of California down for the full month, for example. I would have hoped that there's going to be a little bit more refining than just clarification of what is shut down to give people the sense that there's a progress, a step forward. That doesn't seem to be the case right now. That has to come as a next phase, because ultimately eliminating the virus is not really it cannot be the goal, because that's impossible. What has to be the goal is to reduce that infection rate, this R factor, to be less than 1. Anyway, this is the first day of the quarter. All the best, everybody, on the investment side. Everybody stay healthy, stay well, and I'll be in touch with more of these reports. Take care.